My name is William Crane. I'm 81 years old. I live alone in a modest, cedar-framed house in Columbia, Missouri, at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac that empties into a field that used to be corn, now mostly weeds and rabbits. My days pass in measured silence. Each morning I brew coffee. Real coffee. None of that pod nonsense. And I sit at the same oak table my wife and I picked out in 1976, staring out the window at a yard that no longer grows anything worth noticing. There are no pets to feed, no children to pick up, no work to tend to. There's only the ritual of staying alive. Pills with breakfast, a walk if my knees agree, a quiet lunch, reading in the afternoon, and early dinners that feel like coda rather than meal. I do not complain. I do not expect much else. I was married for 57 years to a woman named Helen, a woman of surprising strength and unfailing tact, the kind of person who knew how to correct your grammar and make you feel loved in the same breath. She was a teacher, like I was. We met at the faculty lounge of Jefferson High School in 1962, when I was still brash and she was already wise. She had a presence about her that made the loudest man in the room listen and the quietest one feel seen. She had dark, sharp eyes and a soft way of folding her arms when she was about to say something that would matter. I fell in love with her because she knew how to listen. I stayed in love with her because she knew how to stay. We had one daughter, Kendra, born in the autumn of 1967 after 3 years of trying and 2 miscarriages that Helen carried in silence. Kendra was a bright child, quick-witted, always eager to prove herself. She inherited her mother's eyes and my stubbornness, which meant that from an early age she was both delightful and difficult. Helen understood her better than I ever did. There were long stretches in Kendra's adolescence when she would slam doors and disappear for hours, and Helen would only sigh and say, "She's finding her edges." I wanted to correct her, lecture her, teach her discipline. Helen wanted to wait, to listen. I suppose, in the end, we both failed, just in different ways. Kendra left Missouri the day she graduated college and only returned out of obligation. Weddings, holidays, a rushed Thanksgiving every 3rd year. She married a man named Dustin, a pediatric neurologist from Denver, the kind of man who seemed polite but never quite looked you in the eye. I never liked him. He had too much polish, too much ease, the sort of man who remembered everyone's name but none of their stories. Helen, of course, said I was too harsh. She always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when it was clear they didn't deserve it. I tried to follow her lead, but with Dustin, it never worked. Something about him reminded me of a well-dressed liar. After Helen fell ill, the visits from Kendra became less frequent, shorter, more mechanical. At first, there were Zoom calls, then voice messages, then nothing. She said Dustin's schedule was brutal, that the hospital had him on call every weekend. She always had a reason, and they always sounded reasonable. That's what made them so hard to argue with. I stopped pressing. What was the point? Helen, even in her weakness, made excuses for her. "She's busy," she would say, barely able to lift her head. "She loves us. She's just overwhelmed." But I could see the hurt in her eyes. I could hear it in the way she paused when the phone didn't ring, the way she folded the blanket over her knees like she was waiting for someone to arrive. Helen died on a Thursday morning, just before sunrise. The nurse said it was peaceful. I don't believe her. There was nothing peaceful about the way her hand went cold in mine, nothing kind about the silence that filled the room afterward. I sat there for 2 hours before calling anyone, not out of confusion, my mind was sharp, but out of defiance. As if delaying the report could delay the fact. As if not announcing it might keep her alive a little longer. When I finally called Kendra, she didn't pick up. I left a message. "Your mother's gone. Please call me back." She returned the call 6 hours later. Her voice was composed, distant. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she said, as though reading from a card. "I wish I could be there, but Dustin's ceremony is this weekend. He's receiving the Professional Excellence Award from the Colorado Board of Pediatric Medicine. It's a really big deal for him." I said nothing. She said, "I'll come next week. I'll book a flight." I said, "Don't bother. The funeral's Saturday." There was a pause. She said, "That's too soon. Can't it wait?" I said, "No." I hung up before I heard her sigh. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Not broke, not shattered, just turned to stone. Helen had given her life to this family. She raised a daughter who now treated her memory as an inconvenience. I told myself not to take it personally, but I failed. How could I not? When someone chooses a cocktail hour over a casket, it becomes personal. That night, I sat in the study and looked through the old folders, insurance papers, birth certificates, tax returns. And beneath them all, the will, the one Helen and I had drawn up 20 years ago. I poured a glass of bourbon, turned on the lamp, and read every word aloud. Then I opened the drawer, took out a pen, and began to make edits. Small at first, then larger. The house I live in is paid off. The pension from my years of teaching still comes in, modest but enough. There are savings, nothing vast, but more than most. We were careful, Helen and I. We lived below our means. We traveled modestly, gifted responsibly, avoided debt. We never indulged in vanity, never remodeled the kitchen, never bought new cars without necessity. Kendra knew that. She knew we had something set aside. I think, in the back of her mind, she always assumed it would be hers. And once, years ago, it would have been. But people change. Daughters grow distant. Priorities shift. And grief has a way of clarifying things. Now, my days are filled with a different kind of silence. Not just the absence of Helen, but the absence of pretense. I don't pretend anymore. I don't explain, justify, apologize. I watch the birds pick at the feeder Helen insisted on hanging from the kitchen window. I listen to the creak of the floorboards she used to scold me for not fixing. I read the books she loved, though I rarely enjoy them the way she did. Her ghost isn't in the house. Not exactly. But her absence has a shape. It sits next to me at dinner. It lingers in the mirror when I shave. It asks me, sometimes in a whisper, what happened to our daughter. I never have an answer. Kendra still hasn't called. It's been 3 weeks. The funeral came and went. It was small, modest, beautiful. A neighbor brought lilacs. A former student of Helen's read a passage from Jane Austen. I buried my wife beneath the willow tree she loved, next to the plot I'll one day occupy. There was no eulogy from our daughter, no tears, no presents, just an empty chair I couldn't stop looking at. That evening, I sat in the kitchen, poured myself another drink, and rewrote the will from scratch. The morning after the funeral was colder than it had any right to be in late May. I rose before the sun and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot where Helen used to keep her slippers. Small, navy blue, with the heel just barely worn down from years of use. They were gone now. Donated, or thrown out. I couldn't remember which. The details had blurred in the blur of the last week, and my mind, though clear, was coated with a haze of too much stillness. I made my coffee as usual. 2 scoops, not 3, because the third was always for Helen, and sat by the kitchen window. A black-capped chickadee tapped at the feeder. The yard, trimmed a week ago for the service, looked unnaturally neat, like a painting of a house no one really lived in. The world kept moving. Birds still fed, the paper still came, and the sky still turned its colors as if nothing had changed. But inside, there was a stillness that no wind could touch. I opened my phone to check for messages. Nothing. No missed calls. No texts. No belated apologies. The last message from Kendra had come the morning of the funeral. Hope everything goes smoothly today. Give Mum my love. I had stared at that message for several minutes, wondering how a person could reduce the burial of their own mother to 2 disinterested lines. Not even punctuation. No comma between love and Mom. No real effort at tone. Just a perfunctory digital shrug. I didn't respond. What could I have said that wouldn't come out wrong? Or worse, come out honest? Helen and I had always believed in ceremony. Not extravagance. God knows we couldn't afford it in our younger years. But meaning, dignity. The small acts that made life feel deliberate. We had a wedding with hand-stitched invitations and readings from Whitman. We celebrated anniversaries with home-cooked meals and a single candle. We said grace, even if we weren't always sure who we were saying it to. And when Helen got sick, I promised her that we'd handle everything properly, right to the end. She wanted lilacs. She wanted to be buried in the blue dress she wore on our 30th anniversary. She wanted the hymn, Abide With Me. I gave her all of it. I gave her what our daughter could not. Presents. That afternoon, I received an email from Dustin. Not Kendra. Dustin. The subject line read, Hope you're holding up. No greeting. No, dear William. Just a short message informing me that he had been honored at the Colorado Medical Association's Spring Gala, that he had received a standing ovation, and that Kendra had helped organize the entire event. He attached a photograph of the 2 of them standing next to a floral arrangement the size of a small tree, both of them dressed in formal attire, smiling. Kendra's dress was emerald green, and her hair was styled the way Helen used to like. For a moment, I imagined Helen seeing that photo. Would she have felt betrayed? Or just forgotten? I closed the email without replying, and I stared at the blank screen for a long time. The next day, a card arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a printed note from a flower delivery service. In memory of Helen Crane. Our thoughts are with you. Kendra and Dustin. The bouquet, apparently, had gone to the funeral home a day late. I had never received it. I threw the card in the trash. There was nothing thoughtful about it. It was obligation disguised as kindness, and I was too old to pretend otherwise. That evening, I sat in Helen's chair and took out a small metal box she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk. It was where she stored our important documents, copies of birth certificates, social security cards, our marriage license. Beneath those papers was a sealed envelope with my name written in her hand. I hesitated, then opened it. It was dated 8 months prior. The letter was short. Will, if I go before you, please don't leave anything to Kendra if she doesn't come to my funeral. I don't say this with bitterness. I say it because I want you to be free. Don't chain yourself to someone who has already let go. We did our best, but love should not be begged for. Yours, always. H. I read the letter 3 times. Her handwriting was shaky, but the words were firm. Helen had always been quiet about her disappointments, but they had lived in her bones. She had felt the absence of our daughter long before I allowed myself to name it. Reading that letter was like seeing her face again, not the face from her last days, worn and pale, but the one from years ago, steady and clear-eyed. She had known, she had seen what I hadn't, or rather, what I had refused to see. A few days later, I received a voicemail from Kendra. Hey, Dad, just checking in. I'll try to come down next week if I can juggle things around. Dustin's got a speaking engagement in Phoenix, so things are a little crazy right now. But I want to help you go through Mom's things. Maybe sort out the house, figure out next steps. Let me know. Her voice was breezy, practiced, The same tone she used when she called from college asking for money to fix her car. There was no mention of grief, no remorse, just logistics. That night, I found myself standing in the guest room, the one Kendra used to sleep in when she was little, the one she now refused to stay in, preferring a hotel for her brief visits. The walls were still pale lavender, though the paint had faded. Her childhood bookshelf remained intact, filled with copies of Nancy Drew and Madeleine L'Engle. There was a photo on the dresser of the three of us at Yellowstone, Helen's arm around Kendra, both of them mid-laugh, me squinting into the sun. I picked it up and looked at it for a long time, and I couldn't help but wonder how that little girl had turned into someone so far removed from the world that raised her. I wasn't naive. People change. Circumstances harden people. But some changes feel like betrayals. The real catalyst, though, the moment I knew something irrevocable had shifted, came a week later. I was out in the yard, raking the edge of the lawn where the grass met Helen's old garden beds, when the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, but when I listened later, it was Kendra again. "Hi, Dad. So I talked to Dustin, and we think it might be smart to think about moving you into something smaller. Maybe assisted living, just while you get through the transition. I know the house is big, and it's a lot to manage. There are some really nice places near us in Denver. We could help with the sale, get you set up. Let's talk soon." She ended with a quick, almost cheerful, "Love you." I stood in the kitchen, staring at the receiver, the message playing in my ear, my hands still dirty with soil. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. My wife wasn't cold in the ground, and my daughter was already making plans for my relocation, already speaking in terms of downsizing, transition, and sale. It was as if she had read a script for how to manage elderly parents and was now dutifully following it, regardless of who I actually was or what I actually needed. That call wasn't about care. It was about convenience. It was about clearing space, both emotional and physical, for her life to resume without complication. That night I poured myself a drink and opened the revised will again. I made new notes in the margins. I changed the beneficiaries. I removed names. I added others. I thought of the public library, where Helen volunteered every Tuesday for nearly a decade. I thought of the adult literacy program she had supported. I thought of the community choir that sang at her service. I thought of every place she had given her time freely and lovingly, and of the daughter who could not give her even a single day. The next morning, I called my attorney. I didn't hear from Kendra for 9 days after her voicemail about assisted living. There was no follow-up, no clarification, no visit. Just that one call dropped like a stone into a still pond, leaving behind only a small ripple of resentment that refused to fade. I tried, for a day or two, to convince myself that her suggestion came from concern, that perhaps she believed I was fragile, or worse, lonely, and that her offer to help was some misguided expression of love. But that theory crumbled when I heard from a neighbor, Janice, who had seen Kendra's Facebook post the day after Helen's funeral. "Wonderful evening celebrating Dustin's award at the CMA Gala. So proud of this man and everything he does for children's health. Blessed. Gratitude." The photo attached showed Kendra beaming in a sequined gown, holding a champagne flute, with Dustin grinning beside her, arms draped casually around her waist, surrounded by people in tuxedos. Helen had been dead for 48 hours. There was no mention of loss, no black ribbon in the corner of the post, not even the vaguest nod to mourning. Just sequins and hashtags and a carefully curated image of happiness. That was when I stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. 2 days later, I received a package in the mail. It was from Kendra, of course. Her neat handwriting on the label was unmistakable. Inside, there was a slim binder filled with brochures for assisted living facilities in Denver. each one circled and annotated with little hearts or stars. This one has great reviews. Dustin knows someone on the staff here. Close to our house, very modern, lots of activities. I flipped through them slowly, each page making my chest feel tighter, my jaw more rigid. There was also a cover letter, printed and signed in ink. "Dear Dad," it began. "I know transitions can be hard, but I really believe this could be a wonderful next chapter for you. These places offer independence with support. You'd have your own space, but wouldn't have to worry about cooking, cleaning, or maintenance. And most importantly, you'd be near us. We could see each other more often. I could drop by after work. Dustin could help with your prescriptions. We could be a real family again. Please take a look, and let's discuss. Love, Kendra." I didn't know what part of the letter was worse. The false sweetness, the audacity of the word family, or the assumption that I couldn't manage my own life. The implication was clear. I was old, alone, and in the way. They weren't just suggesting I move. They were planning it. The brochures weren't options. They were a shortlist. I stood at the counter for a long time, binder in hand, and I thought about how many times I had dropped everything for Kendra's in her life. How often I had driven through snowstorms to pick her up from rehearsals. How I had sat up all night helping her revise college essays. How I had emptied part of our retirement savings to cover her first down payment when she and Dustin bought their house. Never once did I send her a brochure. I gave her what she asked for. I gave her what she didn't ask for. And now, in my hour of loss, she was giving me pre-selected institutions with activity schedules and community dining. The real punch came 3 days later when a man named Colin Baxter knocked on my door. He was polite, mid-30s, wearing a tailored jacket and holding a leather portfolio. "Mr. Crane," he said with the bright smile of a man trained in polite deception, "I'm Colin Baxter, from Hearth and Haven Senior Transitions. Your daughter, Kendra, contacted us about helping you explore housing options in the Denver area. I just wanted to stop by and introduce myself, leave some information, and see if you had any questions." I stared at him for a moment, unsure if I'd misheard. "She sent you here?" I asked. He nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, she said you'd received the packet. We work closely with families to ensure a smooth and dignified transition for aging loved ones. It's a very personalized service." I didn't say anything. He handed me a folder and a card. "No pressure, of course. Just reach out when you're ready. Your daughter speaks very highly of you." I closed the door before he finished his sentence. That evening, I sat down at Helen's desk and opened her notebook. It was a habit I had developed in the weeks since her passing, reading her half-filled journals, her lists, her thoughts scribbled in the margins. One line stood out to me that night, scrawled in faded ink on the back of a grocery list. "Kendra loves us, but she loves the idea of her life more." I traced the sentence with my finger, slowly, like it was carved in stone. Helen had seen it clearly. And now, so did I. I began to understand what this was all really about. It wasn't about me being lonely, or fragile, or isolated. It was about inheritance, about consolidating control, about smoothing out the complications of a father who still had legal autonomy and physical assets. The next day, I called Kendra. She didn't pick up. I left a message. "I got your package. I don't need a handler. Please don't send anyone else to my home." An hour later, she called back. Her tone was clipped. "Dad, you didn't have to be rude to Colin. He's just doing his job." I said, "He had no business being on my porch." She sighed. "Look, I'm trying to help. I know it doesn't feel like it, but I'm trying to make this easier for you." I asked, "Easier for me or easier for you?" She didn't respond. I continued, You didn't come to your mother's funeral. You sent flowers that didn't arrive, and then, without asking me, you start making arrangements for me to be relocated like I'm an old piano nobody wants to store in their house. Her voice grew sharp. That's not fair. I have a job, a husband, responsibilities. I laughed, not kindly. So did Helen, so did I. But we never missed your milestones. We never missed you. There was a silence so thick I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. Then she said, "Maybe you're not thinking clearly right now. Grief does that. That's why this move is important." I hung up. After that, something in me shifted. I no longer wanted to merely amend the will. I wanted to ensure that my final act on this earth was one of clarity, not confusion. I wanted the legacy of Helen's patience and grace to go somewhere it might actually bloom. That week, I made an appointment with my lawyer, Mr. Renner, and told him I wanted to completely restructure my estate. "Are you sure?" he asked, adjusting his glasses. "You're removing your only child." I nodded. "I'm leaving everything to the Helen Crane Literacy Initiative. I'll set it up as a fund for the library. My house, my savings, everything." He hesitated. "What about power of attorney? Medical decisions?" I looked him in the eye. "I want none of that in her hands. None." The following Sunday, I received a card in the mail. It was from Kendra, a simple hallmark with a picture of a sailboat and the words, "Thinking of you." Inside, she had written, "I hope you're doing okay. Dustin says hi. We really want what's best for you. Please consider our offer. We love you." There was no mention of Helen. No reference to the funeral. No apology. No acknowledgement of my message. Just another thin layer of varnish over a splintered relationship. Later that day, I noticed a voicemail blinking on the answering machine. It was from Dustin. "William, hey, I just wanted to touch base. Kendra's worried about you. I know things have been tense, but we really do want to support you in this next stage of life. If there's anything we can do, please let us. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Maybe there's a way forward. Let's talk." His voice was smooth, practiced, almost convincing. But I'd heard it before, in a different key, in different contexts, and it always sounded the same, rehearsed empathy masking calculation. That night I sat in the garden Helen once loved, the one now overgrown with weeds and late-blooming perennials. I listened to the crickets and the far-off sound of a neighbor's television. I thought about what it meant to be a father, what it meant to raise someone with love and see them twist that love into something conditional. I thought about how Kendra used to sit in my lap during storms, asking if the thunder would break the house, and how I would always answer, "No, sweetheart, nothing can break us." But something had broken, and this time it wasn't thunder, it was silence, it was absence. It was a child who chose the comfort of control over the messiness of presence. In the weeks that followed, I withdrew from communication. I didn't respond to messages. I didn't take calls. I spent my time walking, reading, organizing the files Helen left behind. I found an old cassette of her singing with the church choir. I played it one afternoon while cleaning the living room, and the sound of her voice filled the house like a haunting. She had a tremble in her alto that always made me think of sorrow held in check. As I listened, I realized that even in death, Helen was more present in this house than our daughter had been in years. And it was that realization, not loud, not dramatic, but firm and steady, that finally severed the last thread of illusion. I was not preparing for old age with my family. I was preparing to outlive the fantasy that I still had one. The letter arrived without a stamp, tucked discreetly into my mailbox sometime between dusk and nightfall. No return address, only my name written in Kendra's handwriting, too round, too deliberate, like she was trying to mimic sincerity she no longer knew how to feel. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream paper, folded with near-clinical precision. "Dad," it began, "I know things have been tense lately. I know you're hurting. I want to believe that deeper down, you know I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you. You're grieving. You're alone. You've always been proud, but that doesn't mean you have to be isolated. Dustin and I talked, and we think maybe it's time we start preparing for what comes next. Please understand, this isn't about taking anything away from you. It's about making sure you're taken care of. We want to help manage things, in case you ever can't. Love always, Kendra." There was a second page. This one was a notarized letter of intent, drafted, of course, by one of Dustin's legal colleagues, outlining the structure for financial power of attorney and long-term care decisions, naming Kendra as the primary agent and Dustin as alternate. There was even a clause about protecting assets from misuse or mismanagement due to cognitive decline. No accusation. Just preemptive restraint. A hand on the wheel before the car even veers. I sat in my study and stared at the paper, the words bleeding into one another under the dim lamp that Helen used to keep at her sewing table. There was no request for my input, no curiosity about how I felt. It was not a conversation. It was a declaration of intent disguised as concern. It wasn't just that they wanted control. It was that they had already assumed it. I imagined them in their Denver kitchen, sitting across from each other with their matching laptops open, sipping wine while coordinating their parent management strategy like a corporate merger. I imagined Dustin running point, citing precedent, citing efficiency, citing his uncle who did something similar when his father started forgetting the stove. Kendra would nod, maybe chew her lip in mock reluctance, but agree. Because it was cleaner that way, easier. Because dignity, in their minds, was not something preserved through independence, but something handed out like medication. I did not sign the letter. I did not respond. But I did go upstairs and open the cedar trunk at the foot of my bed. Inside were old tax returns, property deeds, birth certificates, a life carefully documented and rarely questioned. I found the original will, the one Helen and I signed in 2006. I found the updated version, half complete, ink still fresh in places, and I found something I hadn't touched in years. A letter Helen wrote the summer after Kendra left for college. It had never been sent. "Will," it said. "Sometimes I wonder if we did too much for her. If we made things too easy. I see the way she looks through us now like we're stepping stones, not people. I don't say this to be cruel. I say it because I'm scared. Scared she won't come back. Not physically. She'll visit when it's convenient. But I mean come back in the real way. Come back to the girl who used to ask me if birds had memories. I miss her. And I miss the version of you that used to believe we could fix everything." Love, H.I., folded the letter slowly, each crease aligning with the ghost of her hand. I placed it on the desk beside the unsigned legal form and stared at the contrast between the two. One written in love, the other in strategy. That night, I had a dream. Helen and I were in the garden again, pruning the rose bushes. She was wearing her old sun hat, the one with the faded blue ribbon. She was laughing, really laughing, and I couldn't hear the sound, but I could see her mouth move and her shoulders shake. I tried to ask her what was funny, but no sound came from me either. I woke with tears on my face, my chest aching in a way that wasn't physical. Grief is strange like that. It waits until you're unguarded. It doesn't need permission. The following morning, I received a voicemail from Dustin. His voice was calm, almost pleasant, like we were casual acquaintances discussing a community project. "William, just following up on the documents," Kendra dropped off. totally understand if you need time. Just so you know, we've already spoken to a financial advisor and a senior care coordinator in Denver. People we really trust. If you have questions or need help with the logistics, we're happy to step in. It's all about making things smoother for you. The casual invasion in that message, "We've already spoken," landed harder than any argument could have. They weren't asking for trust. They were assuming permission. Then came the final straw. On a Sunday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find a woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard. "Mr. Crane? I'm Nancy Pritchard from Valley View Adult Services. Your daughter requested an in-home assessment, just a preliminary wellness visit." I blinked at her. Assessment for what? She smiled, practiced. "We just check on nutrition, mobility, medication management." Nothing invasive. It's part of our Aging with Dignity program. I stared at her until the smile began to falter. "Your daughter should have told you," she added. "She did not," I said, stepping back. "You can tell my daughter she no longer has any say in my dignity. And if she sends another stranger to my home without my consent, I'll consider it harassment." I closed the door and locked it, then stood in the hallway shaking with something that felt dangerously close to rage. They had crossed a line, not with intent, but with assumption. They had decided I was no longer capable, no longer trustworthy, no longer entitled to the space of my own life. That evening, I pulled the final draft of my new will from the drawer, dated it, signed it, and placed it in a sealed envelope. Then I took Helen's old engagement ring, which I had kept in a small velvet box beside her wedding band, and tucked it into a smaller envelope marked Library Auction Donation. That was her wish. She wanted it to be sold, the money used to buy books for the children's section, not passed down as inheritance, not claimed as property. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. It was the phone call in early June that confirmed my darkest suspicions, though, truthfully, the ground had been shifting beneath me long before that moment, and Helen's warnings in her letters had already planted a seed that could no longer be ignored. I had gone about my day as usual, brewing coffee, tending half-heartedly to the weeds around the porch, and sitting with a novel I could not finish, because the words blurred and the sentences lost themselves in the haze of memory. The phone rang around 3 in the afternoon, that dead hour when the house felt most silent, and I picked up expecting another recorded voice offering to reduce my medical insurance costs. Instead, I heard Kendra's voice, bright but brittle, like she had rehearsed what she was about to say. "Dad," she began, "I spoke with Dustin and with a family advisor this week. We really think it's time you sign the papers. This back and forth is dragging on, and it's not good for anyone. If you want, we can schedule a notary to come by, so it's all official and easy for you." There was a practiced lightness in her voice, a deliberate attempt to make the suggestion sound casual, as though signing away authority over my life was akin to choosing a new cable provider. I asked her plainly, "Why are you in such a hurry?" And she gave the expected answers. Convenience, peace of mind, planning ahead. But then, almost without realizing it, she slipped and said, "We need to get everything squared away before Dustin's fellowship expansion goes through. There are some assets we might need to move around." My chest went cold. Assets, not memories, not safety, not care. Assets. That was the moment I knew the conversation had nothing to do with me as a father or as a man who had buried his wife only weeks before. It was about my name on the papers, about signatures that opened or closed doors, about the quiet transference of value from one generation to another. I stayed silent long enough that she grew uneasy. "Dad?" she asked. I said only, "Your mother would have been ashamed to hear you speak like that." And I hung up. 10 minutes later, Dustin called. His tone was colder, stripped of pretense. "William, I think we've been more than patient. Kendra's been trying to help, but you're being obstinate. At some point, we'll have to involve the courts. I'd rather not, but you're not making this easy." I let him finish, then replied, "If you ever threaten me again, even once, I will ensure that you and my daughter never see a cent of what we built." He muttered something under his breath, then ended the call. That night, I sat in the darkened living room and thought about how betrayal doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, in missed funerals, in half-hearted cards, in legal documents disguised as letters of love, in visits from strangers carrying clipboards. You don't notice the depth of the wound until one day you realize you're bleeding everywhere. I poured myself a drink, Helen's old crystal glass, heavy in my hand, and I decided that if they were preparing for war, I would not be defenseless. The following week I met with Renner again, this time not only to finalize the will but to draft a living trust that bypassed Kendra entirely. He looked at me across the polished surface of his desk and asked if I was certain, and I told him I'd never been more so. "They're circling like vultures," I said, "and if I don't take precautions now, they'll find a way to pick my bones while I'm still breathing." He nodded, not with surprise, but with the weary recognition of a man who had heard similar stories too, many times. We established the trust, named the beneficiaries. The library, the literacy fund, a small scholarship in Helen's name, and we made sure that not a single clause left room for challenge. He also advised me to prepare for the inevitable. They would try to argue incapacity. He arranged for me to undergo a full cognitive evaluation with a neurologist and a geriatric psychiatrist, both of whom confirmed what I already knew. That my mind was intact, my memory sharp, my faculties fully present. The reports would be sealed and filed, ready for when the accusations came. Sure enough, by the end of June, I received a letter from a law firm in Denver representing Kendra and Dustin. It stated, in careful legal phrasing, that they had growing concerns about my mental capacity to manage my affairs, citing forgetfulness, confusion, and erratic decisions as reasons to consider guardianship proceedings. They included fabricated examples, forgetting to pay bills, neglecting to eat, leaving the stove on. Lies. All of them lies, and yet written with such authority that to an outsider they might sound plausible. I carried the letter into the kitchen, read it twice, then laughed out loud, the sound echoing against the empty walls. It was so brazen, so transparent, that it almost relieved me. They had revealed their hand fully now. There was no pretending. I faxed the letter to Renner, who called me immediately. "Don't worry," he said. "This is the beginning of a strategy, not the end. They'll push, but we're prepared." He asked if I wanted to respond formally, but I told him no. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. Sometimes silence is stronger than rebuttal. The days that followed were heavy. I spent them sorting through Helen's things, making donations to the church thrift shop, boxing up books for the library, carrying old coats to the shelter. Each act was both painful and liberating. Painful because every object carried a memory, liberating because every donation was a step away from the weight of expectation that Kendra had placed on me. These things were not hers to claim. They belonged to the community that had loved Helen, to the people who would remember her not as a source of assets, but as a source of kindness. Then came the visit I will never forget. It was late afternoon when Kendra appeared on my porch unannounced, her rental car still idling in the drive. She looked thinner than before, her hair straighter, her smile rehearsed. "Dad," she said, "I thought we could talk face to face. Maybe clear the air." I let her in, though every instinct told me to keep the door shut. She walked through the house as if inspecting it, her eyes pausing on furniture, on framed photos, on the clock Helen's parents had given us. Finally, she sat at the table and folded her hands. "I know you're angry," she began, "but you have to see it from my side. You're 81. You live alone. You could fall. You could forget. You could—" I interrupted her. "Stop. Do not recite the pamphlets to me. Say what you actually mean." Her lips tightened. Then she said it. "I can't take care of you from Denver unless I have the authority to act. I can't risk Dustin's career or our financial stability because you refuse to be practical." There it was. Not grief, not love, not even fear. Practicality. The worship of convenience over loyalty. I told her, very calmly, "Your mother asked for one thing in her last days, that you be at her funeral. You chose a party. That choice speaks louder than anything you say now, and you will not get authority over me. Not while I live." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Do you know how selfish you sound? You would rather give everything away to strangers than let your daughter have a say." I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. "They are not strangers. They are the people your mother trusted. You, on the other hand, have made yourself a stranger." She stood up, shaking, her voice rising. "You'll regret this, Dad. You'll regret shutting me out." I said nothing. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard that one of Helen's porcelain figurines rattled off the shelf and shattered on the floor. I picked up the pieces slowly, carefully, as if they were fragile bones. That night, as I sat alone in the wreckage of silence, I realized something final had broken. There was no coming back from this. The girl I had raised was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. And though my heart ached with that knowledge, it also steadied me. Because now there was no more doubt, no more bargaining with hope. There was only the clear path forward, and I would walk it without hesitation. The breaking point came one humid evening in July, when the air was so heavy it clung to my skin like damp cloth, and the ceiling fan did little more than push the heat in slow circles. I had spent the day revisiting the final details of my estate with Renner, ensuring every page was notarized, every witness prepared, every potential loophole sealed so tightly that not even the cleverest attorney could pry it open. It was a long meeting, the kind that left me both exhausted and strangely alive, because each signature I placed on the thick cream paper felt like an act of quiet rebellion, a statement that, even in my 8th decade of life, I was not a passive body, to be shuffled between institutions, but a man capable of directing his own ending. When I returned home, I poured myself a drink, sat in Helen's armchair, and listened to the cicadas screaming through the screen door. That was when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was Dustin's, steady and polite, but with the faint edge of someone who believes the game is nearly won. "William," he began, "I'll be direct. We know you've been making changes to your estate. We know you've been talking to Renner. That's your right, of course, but it's not wise. If you continue down this path, it will only complicate things. There are legal ways to challenge what you're doing, and if it comes to that, it could get ugly. I don't want it to go that way, but if you force our hand, we'll have no choice." He paused, as if expecting me to plead or argue. Instead, I let him sit in silence until he added, "We are your family. You should want to take care of us." I almost laughed, but instead I said quietly, "My family was buried under a willow tree in May. You were not there. My daughter was not there. Family is not a word you get to use anymore." Before he could respond, I hung up. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They were trembling with the electricity of decision, the realization that I had been standing on the edge of action for weeks and had finally stepped forward. I poured the rest of my drink down the sink, opened the drawer where Helen's journals were kept, and took out the letter she had written to me, the one that instructed me not to leave Kendra anything if she skipped the funeral. I placed it beside the final will, slid both into a fireproof envelope, and sealed it with deliberate force. I carried the envelope into my bedroom, placed it inside the trunk where Helen once kept our family photographs, and set the trunk against the wall as if guarding a treasure chest. The following morning I drove to the library with 2 boxes of Helen's belongings, her choir books, her teaching materials, and a selection of children's novels she had cherished. The head librarian, a kind woman named Marianne, greeted me with tears in her eyes. "She was one of our brightest lights," she said softly. I nodded, unable to answer, and I handed her the small velvet box that held Helen's engagement ring. "Auction it," I said. "Use the money for the children's section. That's what she wanted." Marianne pressed her hand to her mouth and whispered, "She'll live here forever." For the first time since Helen's passing, I believed it. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter addressed to Kendra. It was not angry, though it could have been. It was not cruel, though part of me wanted to wound her with words the way she had wounded us with absence. Instead, it was clear, steady, and final. "Kendra," I wrote, "I have loved you since the moment you first opened your eyes. I loved you through every slammed door, every silence, every absence. I loved you even when you did not love me back. But love is not a shield against truth. And the truth is this. When your mother died, you chose to be elsewhere. That choice cannot be undone, nor can it be excused by busyness, by career, or by obligation to another man. It was the truest revelation of your heart, and it revealed that we no longer exist inside it. Because of that, I've altered my estate. Nothing will pass to you or to Dustin. Everything will go where it belongs, into the hands of those who cherished your mother and will carry her spirit forward. This is not revenge. This is justice, quiet and simple. When the time comes, you will understand. Until then, live your life as you wish. You have already chosen it." I signed my name, folded the letter, and placed it with Rena for safekeeping. When I returned home, I sat by the window as the sun sank low, painting the sky with streaks of red and violet. I thought of Helen, of the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder in the evenings, humming songs under her breath that she never sang aloud. I thought of the little girl Kendra had once been, sitting cross-legged on the floor in footed pajamas, asking me to read one more story, one more chapter, one more page before sleep. And I thought of the woman she had become, and how she had chosen absence over presence, entitlement over compassion, calculation over loyalty. The pain of that thought did not vanish, but it transformed. It no longer felt like a knife twisting inside me. It felt like a scar, permanent, yes, but healed enough to live with. That night, as the crickets sang and the old house groaned around me, I whispered into the silence, "It is finished." Not a declaration of defeat, but of completion. The battle had been waged. The decision sealed. I had rewritten not only my will, but the story of my ending. And though I knew the storm would come, lawsuits, accusations, anger, I was no longer afraid. Because the truth was on paper, the evidence was in letters, the love was preserved in legacies that no court could erase. I poured myself one last drink, lifted the glass to the empty chair across from me, and said, "Helen, I kept my promise." Then I drank deeply, set the glass down, and let the night swallow me whole. The weeks after that night passed with a strange quiet. Not the suffocating silence of grief, but the kind of quiet that follows a storm. When the air smells of iron and the ground is littered with broken branches, yet the world feels strangely cleansed. I had expected constant battles, phone calls filled with rage, letters laced with accusations, perhaps even unannounced visits filled with shouting, but there was nothing. Kendra and Dustin retreated into their Denver lives, their absence so complete that it was almost as if they had never existed at all. I still heard about them indirectly. Neighbors showing me photos from social media, snippets of conversation at church where someone would mention Dustin's career or Kendra's latest vacation. but those reports felt like dispatches from another country, a place I had once visited but no longer belonged to. My world had narrowed, and for the first time in years, it felt like mine alone. I spent my days tending Helen's garden, reclaiming it from weeds, pruning the roses, planting marigolds where her hands had once pressed seeds into the soil. I donated more of her clothes, her cookbooks, even her jewelry to the causes she loved, each act a small release, a surrender of objects that no longer bound me but instead carried her spirit outward into the community. The library sent me a letter thanking me for the ring, telling me that the auction had raised enough money to refurbish the entire children's reading corner, complete with beanbag chairs and new shelves. The letter made me weep, not out of sorrow, but out of something softer, a gratitude that Helen's touch would linger in a place of learning and laughter rather than gathering dust in a drawer. I kept waiting for regret to creep in, for a sudden stab of doubt to make me wonder if I'd gone too far in cutting Kendra off, but that moment never came. Instead, what grew inside me was a clarity that bordered on peace. I thought often of Helen's words in her letters, her gentle acknowledgement that love should not have to be begged for, and I realized she had been preparing me for this for a long time. She knew the truth before I would admit it, that our daughter had slipped away from us long ago, and that clinging to her was only prolonging the ache of abandonment. By rewriting the will, by closing the door that Kendra herself had walked away from, I was not acting in cruelty, but in honesty. I was setting the record straight, ensuring that what Helen and I had built with patience, discipline, and care would not be reduced to numbers on a balance sheet, but would instead become a living memory of her kindness. One evening, as summer began to lean into autumn, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea instead of bourbon, watching the sunset bleed into gold across the horizon. The cicadas had quieted for the season, replaced by the softer hum of crickets, and for the first time in months, I felt a calm that was not tinged with despair. Children from the neighborhood rode bicycles up and down the street, their laughter ringing out in the cooling air, and one little boy stopped at my yard to admire the marigolds. "My grandma grows those too," he said proudly before racing off again. In that moment, I realized that legacy is not about bloodlines or inheritance, but about the way small gestures ripple outward into the lives of others, and that Helen's legacy, carried forward through the garden, the library, and the community, would outlast both of us. I know that someday Kendra will discover the truth. She will stand in an office or courtroom and learn that the will she assumed would grant her comfort has instead granted her nothing but absence. Perhaps she will rage. Perhaps she will call me cruel. Perhaps she will tell herself stories about betrayal. But I will not be there to hear it, and that thought comforts me. My justice does not require her recognition. It requires only my own certainty. And I have that certainty now, solid and unwavering, like the scar left by a healed wound. As for me, I do not live with bitterness. I live with the ghost of a woman who loved me fiercely and faithfully, who guided me even in her absence, who left me the tools to finish the story we began together. Every night I sit by the window, book in hand, and imagine her beside me, correcting my grammar, smiling when I pretend to be annoyed, humming softly as she turns the page. That is my inheritance, and it is more than enough. I have lost my daughter, yes, but I have not lost myself. I have lost the illusion of family, but I have gained the truth of dignity. And in the end, as I sit in this quiet house that still bears Helen's touch, I find that truth is all I need.